Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Krutikhin, for being here today with us. Well, ICEUR is continuing its series of interviews with leading international experts and analysts and consultants on the oil and gas industry, and the former Soviet Union and Russian politics, who has as well many years of experience in journalism. These days, Russia is continuing its invasion of Ukraine, even though this war had started only 3 weeks ago. It is already having enormous global implications, and the EU remains, despite shifting geopolitics, still very much dependent on Russian energy. So many people are asking themselves, what would happen if Russia stopped its energy exports to the EU? And how realistic is such a scenario?
Well, thank you for the invitation to speak. I think all scenarios are now possible because the war is going on. And well, even politically predicting the decision makers' attitude in Russia is, I think, impossible right now. One of the scenarios is for Russia to stop delivering gas and oil to the outside world. In Russia, they are discussing such scenarios, but they prefer to speak about switching the flows from Europe to China, to Asia, to other countries. Well, now we can see if it is practical, if it is possible at all. Well, Russia is dependent on exports of gas and oil. Officially, such revenues from exports of hydrocarbon raw materials occupy about 27% of the federal budget. In fact, this is only three taxes. One is the mineral extraction tax, which is the Russian equivalent for royalty. The other is the export tax and the excise tax for petroleum products. If we add the dividend of oil and gas companies, which the state can claim, if we add the tax on profit of oil companies, on profit of the personnel of oil companies, and other taxes in Russia, we can see that the Russian budget is almost 60% dependent on oil and gas. This is a tremendously important factor for the Russian economy and for the Russian survival, I would think. And so Russia would not, I don't think Russia is prepared to switch the exports even from Europe, from the nations which are officially referred to as, well, adversaries or unfriendly countries. Yes, it is possible, but the possibility is not very large.
Thank you. So there is still several active pipelines delivering gas and oil through Ukrainian territory. So how could this war affect the infrastructure and operation of these pipelines?
Yes, I'm watching very closely how the Ukrainians are managing to maintain transit over their territory. It is mostly gas. 2 of the compressor stations have been badly damaged in Ukraine. And the Ukrainian media writes that the Ukrainians are risking their life repairing the compressor stations and the pipelines that go from Russia to Europe. And I think they are determined to maintain the transit of Russian gas because, well, basically the European countries need that gas. They are critically dependent on the Russian gas supply. As to oil pipelines, they do not pass, well, only partially. It is the Druzhba pipeline that goes mainly across the territory of Belarus, but its southern branch goes across Ukraine into Slovakia and the Czech Republic. The deliveries of oil still go on.
Well, and we have seen several reports about fighting very close to nuclear power stations and other important infrastructures in Ukraine. So how is Ukraine still maintaining its supply of energy despite the Russian invasion?
Yes, we know that the largest in Europe, the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, has all but stopped operations. It is occupied by the Russian military forces, and it is very difficult for Ukraine to get power supply. Well, one of the factors is the war is going on, and many industrial consumers just stopped consuming power because they are out of jobs. And second, Ukraine has its own power stations, and about 20 billion cubic meters of gas are produced annually in Ukraine. And Ukraine also imports first electricity from Europe, because a few days ago, Ukraine has become a part of the integrated power grid, the European power grid, and officially it can switch off the supply from Belarus and Russia, and the Ukrainians have done so. In addition, the Ukrainians are receiving natural gas from European traders across the border with Slovakia, Poland, and Hungary. And so when we see that the consumption is decreasing because of the war, Ukraine, I think, can survive in terms of energy supply.
Thank you very much. So not all countries in Europe are equally dependent on Russian energy, but for example, Germany is very much so. How are these countries trying to assure their energy security?
Well, we have learned that there is a big plan of the European Union to decrease dependence on Russian gas. First of all, it is gas because it is critical for many countries. I'm afraid that right now it is impossible to immediately stop imports of Russian gas, because some countries, for example, Bulgaria, Finland, Slovakia, Hungary, they are critically dependent on Russian gas. Some countries such as France, Italy, they can survive. They receive a lot of natural gas through terminals that import LNG. They can exchange the flows of gas across interconnectors that pass across their borders. Unfortunately, the interconnectors between Western Europe and Central and Eastern Europe are not in place in many cases, and it will take several years to establish a reliable network which would enable the Europeans to transport gas in case of emergency, in case of disruptions of supply from Russia. But it will take, I can repeat, it will take several years to do so. For example, Italy recently declared they can achieve zero dependence on Russian natural gas by 2027 only. I think this is a reasonable time frame for such a process.
So could the war in Ukraine be actually a turning point towards renewable energy in the EU, since they're searching for alternative energy sources?
Yes, I think so. It is one of the incentives for several dramatic developments in the energy policy of the EU. First, it is there is very high interest in developing renewable energy sources first. Then I think the Europeans are thinking twice now before giving orders to close down nuclear reactors that produce electricity. And the Ukrainians are thinking about maybe temporary lifting some environmental requirements and allowing coal-fed power stations to continue operations or even expand the production of electricity from coal. This is an emergency. especially in wartime, but I think it will pay off.
Okay, thank you. So when we shift our attention to the Western sanctions and how they affect Russia, how dependent is the Russian oil and gas industry on Western technology and imports?
Well, it depends from company to company. All the Russian companies that produce oil and gas are very heavily dependent on field services that are provided by such companies as Halliburton, Schlumberger, Baker Hughes. And those companies are determined to stay in Russia and to continue operations. If they continue providing technologies, they say that they will not follow the sanctions, and nobody forces them to abandon Russia. In this case, I think production of oil and gas is not going to decrease in terms of technologies. But there are other factors. Because of the sanctions, some banks refuse to finance trade in oil and gas across the Russian border. Russian companies keep delivering oil to loading terminals on the Baltic Sea, in the Far East, in the Black Sea, but some tankers just cannot find the consumers. We know that at one given moment, if I remember it correctly, there was a report that about 22 million barrels of crude oil from Russia remained in tankers which couldn't go to any specific destination because the traders couldn't find buyers, regardless of very high discounts. The discounts now are as high as $30 per barrel, and still the banks, not only European and American banks, but also Chinese banks, refuse to get involved in the transactions for Russian oil. And this is one of the reasons why Russian oil production may decrease maybe by 20 or 25% in the next quarter, because it's a great problem to market this oil, not to produce, but to market. This is the most serious effect of the sanctions that the Russian oil and gas industry is feeling.
Great, thank you very much for your assessment. So we see that trade flows on a global scale are shifting. So the EU and Russia are both looking for new partners. Which countries would benefit from the sanctions against Russia?
Well, this is too early to say, but I believe that first, it is the United States, where they produce LNG, and LNG is in great demand because of the restrictions on Russian gas supply. It is Qatar. Maybe this country will accelerate its program of increasing the potential of producing LNG. This is Australia, which also has a problem of increasing LNG production. And some other countries, even in Africa, I think they are now ruminating the idea of entering the market of LNG. And this is a very promising business in the future. As to Russia, I think now Russia has two large projects of LNG and one very small project in the Baltic Sea. And a very big program of new projects in the same field. But I think most of them will not go ahead because of the sanctions and because of the ongoing war.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Krutikhin, for sharing your point of view and giving us insights into the Russian oil and gas industry. Okay.
Thanks for having me.